everyone. Welcome to another episode of Omni Athlete. You're here because, like us, you believe that sport is a vehicle for elevating global consciousness. But you know that elevating global consciousness through sport only matters if it actually helps you to achieve a peak performance state, get in the zone, and compete at your highest level. We created this show to highlight the world's highest achieving mind, body, and spirit competitors, to unveil for you the side of sports that most never see and rarely know exists. Okay, so today's guest is a doctor of physical therapy, high-level black belt martial artist, master of somatic awareness, and former D1 college football player who was destined for the NFL before a devastating injury rocked his world. Told by the medical community that he may never be able to use his right arm and shoulder the way he had been accustomed to ever again because of severe muscle and nerve damage, not to mention the literal hole in his brachial artery, it appeared he would be destined for a life of limitation. But limitation was something he refused to tolerate. Despite his injury, he forged ahead and learned the secrets to bending the very strings of reality to his will while healing his body and earning his doctorate. Using a unique combination of Eastern and Western philosophy, a belief that healing is a multidimensional process that requires as much mental and emotional alignment as it does physical, he has helped countless hundreds of patients, including former professional athletes like members of the Denver Broncos and Denver Nuggets, to regain a sense of wellness, connect their mind, body, and spirit to truly experience what peak performance means and feels like in all of their bodies. It's my pleasure to introduce the man who literally and definitively showed me that we have wings, a tail, and can fly, Dr. John Kummrow. Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Yeah.
Appreciate it very much.
So, there's so many places we could start. We were literally just talking a moment ago about the perspective rehabilitation takes and how most athletes, right, I'm talking about this off camera, most athletes look at their performance around sport with this very narrow lens, this hyper-focused lens, right? And I would love to kick off our conversation by really just examining what does it mean to truly rehab from an injury when we look at it through the lens of mind, body, and spirit.
Well, you know, what we were talking about is that I think a lot of times with athletes, they participate in their sport, but very, very few of them train to reign, as I call it, you know, where they've really got a regime that allows them to participate not only in their sport and perform well and have things that are very specific to their sport, but then also have a balanced program that helps them stay, stable and stretched all at the same time. So, I think that the reason that athletes have a tendency to just focus on their sport and not in cross training is, for a variety of resource reasons, whether it be their knowledge or not knowing what to do to, their schools and things not giving them the right programs, So I think there's a lot of things that feed into why they just kind of look at what they're doing and not of what they're doing outside of their sport.
So looking at that lens of injury, right? So many athletes, injury is just typically part of performance. At least that's what any athlete who's achieved at a high level has typically gone through some level of injury. And that brings to light this really interesting relationship that a lot of us have with pain and with the things that injury, the things that it brings to the surface for us mentally and emotionally. And one of the, I think, most challenging things for athletes of any sport, but especially athletes that are newer to just competing at a high level, is how they respond to those injuries from a mental and emotional side.
Well, and I think, that's a big thing is that we're so busy working on our body like it's a car, and then I think a lot of people who are getting into this, then they start to move their body like a car would move into being like a transformer. And then once you really understand the way the system works, and you go from like your transformer state to your avatar body, because then you now go from this like, oh, I need to fix this part, to then trying to put it together as a whole. And so, and that's happening, I think, more, but it's still, pretty young in making sure that we're addressing the chemical engineering part, the mechanical engineering part, and the emotional engineering part.
Why has it been just one piece for so long?
Well, and that's what we're talking about too. It's almost like what you just said about focusing just on your sport, and not training as a whole. And then you're just, looking at it through, this is, I do the bread making, so that here's the bread, instead of looking at, everything that they could be doing for them.
When you work with a new patient, or when and if you reflect on some of the high-level athletes that you've worked with, can you think of a consistent signal that somebody's body tends to give them when what they're trying to work through is not just a physical limitation?
Well, I mean, as a provider, and boy, that's kind of a hard question as to something where, because I think it's in any injury. Yeah. That's just, to me, a natural part of the process where, if somebody's not addressing that, I just don't understand almost. So
when they're not addressing the other pieces of it.
Right, to, making sure that the person, and most people know you don't want to be afraid of your injury when you're going back and things like that, but the reason that, you sprained your ankle when you walked, down the flight of stairs wasn't, and you're texting, was because of who you were texting, and then you had this emotional response, and then why do you miss this one step? Yeah, now I'm not saying it's causal, but there being a correlator of how come you went down these 8 steps and you missed this one step because you're texting somebody that you're having an emotional, response to, and then you miss your step. Yes, it's this mechanical, quick injury, but, let's also think like, well, who were those people in your life, and were they causing you stress, and why are we, moving so naturally through this, and then we just take that wrong step.
So that's a really interesting way to approach this, right? Because now suddenly, as an athlete, I have to really expand my field of vision, right? Literally. So, and I reflecting on injuries that I've had, and reflecting on just conversations we've had with athletes and coaches, it's just so often that we focus, okay, you sprained your ankle, right? If we're on the field, right? You literally went through this, right? Okay, if I'm on the field and I roll my ankle, or I break a bone, and I'm usually thinking, man, I made the wrong cut, right? Or I made the wrong read, and I did something, injury occurred because of something physical that I did. Not usually do we pull back and say, wow, what was the dynamic or the energetic relationships I had with my teammates, right? My coaches, right?
Exactly. Like, what if you were fought with your girlfriend or boyfriend or something, or somebody had jumped on you, or didn't, there's some sort of maybe other extraneous variable to put into the equation to, try to make sure that we're looking at every part that we could address.
How do you challenge athletes and coaches to more readily view that, to kind of pull back a little bit?
Well, I think the biggest thing, of course, first is just their education and awareness of it. Sports psychology is something that has, been around for quite some time, but I don't know how much it's really being used, or sometimes people feel really forced into it. And I think that's when it's really hard too, is because, we need to be able to kind of like find somebody who we're really going to connect with as like kind of a mentor, and sometimes it's not your coach. The coach needs to get you over to, somebody who is more one-on-one, and then maybe it's like, hey, I'm not connecting with you. You need to find a different person who's going to really be able to give you those senses of, emotional strength and comfort and clarity, because you go, we were so similar. We had the same, drama or trauma, in whatever way, and so then you're able to connect with that person, and they help you work through those layers of that lens.
So it's like, as a coach, if I really look at the lens of peak performance for my players, right, I truly need to be looking at not how much can I control in what they do, but how much can I empower them to really step into a space themselves, right? Like to energize them, to say it's not just, okay, how do I dictate every moment? How do I dictate every interaction, relationship that you have? I, as a coach, have this responsibility, and it seems really energizing when you put it in that frame, to nudge them to find ways to connect to the people that will empower them internally, right?
Right, and so that's why too, I think, any patient that comes in, I say, look at yourself like a triangle. The body's just, triangles, everybody knows about triangles in nature and all these sorts of things. So again, looking at it from that, how can you help yourself chemically, how can you help yourself mechanically, and how can you help yourself emotionally? And then finding who, or do you have players for each of those things, or who could they be, and then try to, get them into the right places so that they can get that performance all the way. I mean, that's a very, Phil Jackson, right? This is very like the Zen part of it is bringing in the fact that you need to work through, emotional dynamics with your team members and things like that too, so that everybody's really giving a good flow to the game, when they're actually in it. Instead of, if there's any resistance, since I was electrical engineering first, V equals IR, right? So if there's a bunch of resistance, then you're going to have a current issue, and then you're not going to be outputting the kind of force and velocity that you want to. So is that restriction coming from your own thoughts? Is it coming from your body? And what can we do then about it?
So there's two things that popped into my brain. So for those of you guys that don't know, John and I know each other pretty well, and so we've had conversations like this before. And one of the recurring themes, phrases that you've used, is angles and energy transfer. And I feel like as athletes, we very rarely acknowledge, we experience energy, right? Like we're energetic beings as it is, and as athletes, we tend to find a connection to that energy more readily, right? Whether it's
but I think a lot of athletes too, depending on their religious background or things like that, the phrase energy they can kind of shy away from or not understand that it's just like the science of your body has energy. It's the simple way for anybody. To me, it's like if you walk in the room, you're not going to like everybody in that room, right? You're going to energetically be either drawn to or pushed away from certain people. So I think that there's simple ways that people can understand that. Well, it may not be extremely science-based as far as like the way that we're interacting on that energy yet, since we don't have the technology to see the, way that our electromagnetic field would be interacting with somebody else quite yet, then this is, something that people have to be able to one, not only be aware of it, but really then that's the integration process. Are they really, it's like, oh yeah, I've heard about this kind of thing. Are they actually really trying to figure out how to apply that concept?
Well, so you're absolutely right. Like the energy, the word energy is very similar in some ways to the word spiritual in the context of athletics, right? So when we say spirit or when we say energy, what comes to mind for most, I think, is that they start thinking about religion, right? Okay, so that means I'm either Christian, I'm Buddhist, I practice Islam, I practice Judaism, whatever the case may be. So those words mean a certain thing to me when in the context of the conversation we're having and in the context of really what we believe through Omni Athlete is energy, spirit, just represent things that we can't physically see the way I can see you in front of me.
Well, I had to, and that's the thing is I think, one story I had was a very, very high level Iranian fighter. And so where he was though when I had met him is he had all these like MRIs and things like that said, yeah, you've got some problems, but it really is, shouldn't have been impacting him the way that it was to where he wasn't able to perform. And one of the things that we would always talk about, since he was from there, is either like you're Muslim there or you're atheist. And I was like, you need to believe in something. And he wasn't. And so I just said, there's nothing for me to do for you, because if you don't have faith in something, then what we do know in medicine, right, is the placebo effect. And if you don't believe you're going to get better, you're not, period. And so then I think, that another guy that I went to school with, he called it like an underlying motivational intelligent force. So there's no bias or judgment. If you want to, adhere to whatever, that's fine, because you need that to be able to say, hey, I have faith that I'm going to, God, this, that, whatever is going to help me heal. And that part is very important for healing for people.
It's a power source, right?
Well, and we even know, from your endocrine system and your hypothalamus and all these other things, but in your dopamine and your, substantia nigra in your brain, all these things are helping you chemically heal. We know if you're under this glucocorticoid stress system all the time, that you're not going to be able to get the same sort of cellular transport and blood and oxygen and the things that you need to heal. So,
and so this is I think maybe even still there's this evolution we're going through where we're starting to see there is science supporting why belief in something, belief in a connection to a bigger thing, and cultivating that belief does have healing properties, right? I mean, from the science now showing, that the electromagnetic field emitted by our heart extends beyond our body to the ability we know that people who do find a connection to faith at times they have, I was reading a study recently where there was multiple instances of cancer patients who one of the major shifts that they made once they were diagnosed was saying, we're going to go get really involved in a spiritual community of some sort, right? It didn't really matter what it was, but that as part of their recovery, they ended up both in remission very quickly and also lived a very healthy life after that, right? And there's this connection to spirit and the power of it that doesn't have to be about religion, just has to be being part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, I mean, and there's been lots of cases, over the years where people, are taught that are cancer patients. One of the guys that was one of my senseis and mentors, and he had testicular cancer when he was 18, and so, they would talk about how they would want him to close his eyes and envision him sitting in a white room, and that this cancer that was being thrown in was this black. And so I also think it's interesting, the colors, because these sorts of things where, black and white, sometimes, really white isn't healing. White is like sebaceous cyst gland or something, where we just had, an excision of a patient of that, where it's like all this gross white fluid is coming out of the body that is not good. So, sitting in a white room in the black, and the way that we kind of, then have the responses to these things is supposed to, then the white is supposed to meant to be your immune system, right? And, that's how you're healing yourself, by trying to basically focus on your immune system. And then, throwing this black into it is, cancer being these cells that really don't have a purpose, and then, then your immune system clears them. So, yeah, it's really interesting the way that we use imagery, to help our bodies be able to heal themselves.
So one of the first things, maybe one of the first ever conversations that you and I had, right? And you used the phrase, I want to say, suit and shadow, right? And you used this visual of my body, helped me see my body in a new context, right? Which created the ability for me to say, wow, I've got awareness on the back half of my body that I had either lost or just hadn't had for as long as I can remember. Where did that come from for you in cultivating that level of awareness to, it's not just what I see and what's in front of me, but there's a 360-degree awareness that I can cultivate?
Well, I mean, a lot of that was, and that's a phrase too that is in yoga, they talk about your back body. I just use a different image, that shadow coming up your shoes off your back. The reason that was actually such a thing for me, that shadow, was, it goes all the way back to Peter Pan, right? He loses his shadow, and so, you're just in front of you, because, we're always taking in information through our eyes and our ears, and everything's up here. We don't feel behind us, everything's moving forward, not what's in back. And so then when you become, kind of whole again, and I'm not thinking about my Achilles tear or my back injury, then it's kind of like, well, I've got this whole, shadow that comes up my back, and then that actually is 2D is the problem. So then it needs to become a suit. And that's, your skin is your biggest organ. And, most of us, if you say, do you feel all your skin right now? You would say, no. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. So, getting those kind of sensory systems online through different things like that. But, I had, people have to be ready for that kind of thing, or have to have gone through enough experiences. Otherwise they, will disconnect from you, or think that you're kind of like kooky or things like that, when you're like, no, this is really what we're talking about why you turn from a transformer into an avatar, because of the skin. We can do a lot of stuff in robotics, but, trying to create skin, is probably one of the hardest things besides nerve medicine right now, to be able to figure out, how are we going to use glia and satellite cells and these kind of things for nerve injuries, and trying to regenerate skin once people have really bad skin injuries. I mean, we do all these things for total knees and hips and all the orthopedic things, but when it comes to the skin and the nerves, those are the things that we're behind on the most right now. And that's why, where people would say, we've got to see Avatar, I didn't see that for 4 years. And, from when it came out to when I actually saw it, or Doctor Strange. And I'm like, hey, they're stealing my concepts, because they're not my concepts, and that's the whole thing, is that, these concepts have been around for a long time, and science is doing their best to try to make that bridge between, here's your science and here's your spirituality.
How do you prepare somebody for that, right? So how do you, if you reflect on what happened to you as an athlete that created a shift that opened you to seeing that perspective, what was it?
Part of it was seeing, the guys that were teaching me. I was 24 in what I thought in the best shape of my life, and they could outmove me, and so then I was like, well, that doesn't make sense, and so that was part of it. And then part of it was just, to continually working on your body, if that's what you're just doing all the time, so that your body can do what you need it to do for you. Then it was work and will through like that process of, well, my arm's like this and I can move my fingers. Okay, well then I can do that part, and then I can get here, and then I can rotate my trunk, and you just keep going through cycles like that. I just got a patient recently who was, he and I were talking about the same thing because he was a professional snowboarder, and he broke his neck, and he was he was a quad. And they said he'd never walk out of there, and he walked into my clinic just fine. We're still working on things, but what you're told and what you can do are two different things.
Where do you, or how did you cultivate that, right? So the reason I ask this question, athletes, especially young athletes, right, we get this identity built up that at times, although everything we are doing points us in the direction of saying, I can literally create my body into whatever I need it to be, right? Like that, as athletes, we learn that on the field, on the court, running, whatever it is, we experience that. But so often, the way that we approach the rest of life disconnects us from that reality. And so an injury happens, like what happened to you, a setback occurs, and we don't consciously cultivate the feeling of, oh, this could be the greatest thing that ever happened to me. This could be the thing that pushes me to that next level. Instead, more often than not, it devastates us, and either we spiral that takes us 5-10 years to get back to where we were, or we just quit altogether. And I wonder if you reflect on, like, how did you start to cultivate, I can do this. I can make my body, I can get it to the place it needs to be to do the things that I want it to do.
Because I'd rather die than be disabled.
Yeah.
And so if you take that perspective, then you're going to work for it, not talk about it. And the other thing too, with a lot of athletes too, is that they need to, some people, that's what they're destined to be, and that is their identity. But then they also have to understand, like, okay, I don't need to hyper focus my identity in just this. If 99% of D1 athletes don't go pro, and they all have stories like we do, then what are you besides an athlete, even if that is just what you are, and so you're still a person. And so then you have to, work on cultivating who you are as a whole, even though this is what you are.
How does your body fit into cultivating that when you transition out of sport?
Well, that's really different, because that's why I think so many athletes have such a hard time, because you're not getting the same amount of endocrine response, attention, right? All these sorts of things. And then now what am I without all the lights and without all the, electrolytes that your body goes through when you're being an athlete? And then, that's why I think so many athletes have a hard time with addictions and things like that afterwards, because their brains just saying, I need all this dopamine that I'm not getting because I was getting it over here. So where can I get this? And so then they search for it. And that's why you see people like Dennis Rodman and amongst many others that, go into, now granted, he was doing it the whole time he was an athlete, but, other folks who, especially with CTE and things like that, where they're having, chronic brain inflammation, that they're looking for things like, marijuana and stuff like that really decrease intracranial pressure and other things like that, because they're just trying to self-medicate, because they have so much of their identity into their athletics that it's important, I think, for any coach to always be trying to say, how are your grades, even if you don't care about them, or what do you like to learn about, that's outside, trying to find, things, you'd be surprised, some huge D tackle likes to, break dance or something, or likes to garden, and you're like, what? But then you start cultivating them as a gardener to a certain level, and so, finding their their identity besides as an athlete, but just as a human, I think is always like the hard part, because so many of these athletes, even college athletes, we have so much, when you're out and around with other people, oh, what sport do you play? Oh, and then this is all this rhetorical reinforcement as to what you are, because everybody, your parents tell them, oh, they're in soccer now, or they're in baseball, and how's baseball? Yeah. And then that interaction starts to reinforce what their identity is.
So as a coach, what I hear in what you're saying is that, there's this notion of a long body, right? Our long bodies as individuals being the true energetic environment that we live in, the people, not just our teammates, right? But our family members, our friends, our community members, Absolutely. Connecting to even our environment, right? So what comes to mind as you're saying that is, we have this loop that gets reinforced in athletics, where because we celebrate athletes the way we do, especially at the Division I and II, even at times like the Division III level, when you play a sport in college, you are so far ahead of where the rest of the world is in terms of athletic, especially people competing at the high school level, right? You get propped up on a pedestal. And then if you make it to the professional level, all of a sudden you are celebrated on another planet completely, right? And what comes to mind for me is we're creating this loop where the only thing the athlete ever gets talked to about is, how's your sport? How are you doing? How was practice today? How was your game? Oh, what happened there? You guys lost to so and so. You won to whoever. So as a coach, what can I do to change the environment that my team is in, that my players are in, or if I'm an athlete, how can I do a better job of finding ways to find novel experiences that don't reinforce the identity that I am an athlete?
Well, I think that's where a lot of the NFL and NBA need these almost like mentoring programs that I'm sure that they're getting into more, because you look at people like Johnny Manziel and stuff. They need to have things where, like, it's unfortunately, it may even seem like it's almost like a certain amount of babysitting or childlike type of curriculum of, we're going to go to the mountains and we're going to camp and we're going to make sure that part of our program has alternate experience in them. Hey, we're gonna take the team to go to the history museum. The first thing after the game, we're not gonna talk about the game necessarily all the time. Those are all kinds of things that if you look at again, to bring in, Phil Jackson and stuff like that, that's a big thing for the Zen master, is that, you're not just looking at one part of the field, that you're seeing the whole thing, and that field is also life.
Let's take a left turn slightly and intentionally. When I say consciousness, what does that bring to mind for you?
For me, it's consciousness is understanding, where you are and then why you are, and so understanding that, the way that I think about it now, of course, at first is a lot of science as well. Your consciousness is your frontal lobe, it's your executive function. So this is where we're thinking from, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's where your consciousness is, and so then sometimes you go to Myers-Briggs, right? Are you a thinker or are you a feeler? Mm-hmm. And some people are feelers, then their consciousness is more, oh, look at that, tree. And I'm like, how are you looking at the tree? And I'm thinking about all these things, right? And so different people's consciousness comes from different places. They're just experiencing as opposed to thinking. So I think consciousness is somewhat about, mindfulness and presence. And then what that means to the person is, so many different things in that instant.
How does that self-awareness play into connecting to our bodies?
I think that's where what we do then is we have to learn about our bodies, and that's where learning that, again, this isn't, to go back to the car, it's not I'm fixing this wheel and I'm fixing, this drive shaft or this or that, it's not just a bunch of parts, and then it's not a crank motor anymore. It's a big Tesla car, right? So it's all about understanding that the muscle doesn't fire without the nerve telling it what to do. So it's all figuring out what is going on with you electrically. Because if you think about power being work over time, and then work is force times distance, and we're looking then at this big equation, what of these dynamics, whether it's in a dialogue or in sport or whatever, can we manipulate to try to get the best performance out of people?
So there is what just popped into my brain, right? Is this notion of, I'll go back to injuries because it comes up in a different context now. So injuries have this beautiful way, and we've had other guests that have mentioned to us this notion of pain being an echo of communication in the body, right? So we have this notion to get like we talked about before, super hyper focused. I rolled my ankle, I must fix my ankle. One of the things that I've heard you talk about before, and I think is really interesting, is that oftentimes the place to start is not the ankle, right? Let's say I have a rolled ankle or sprained or broken or something here. Oftentimes that's just my body's telling me something, but it may not be telling me anything about my ankle at all.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where, of course, we talk about movement chains and moving up the chain, but also, again, then we're starting to look at things where old research would say, oh, if you get the mobility back, then the proprioception of your body is just there. But people need to understand what pain really is. And I think that's a big part of what people don't understand, because really sharp, dull, achy pain, this goes up your, spinal thalamic tract. Then you have pressure and temperature pain, and this goes up your, nucleus proprius tract in the back. And so sometimes pain is good, sometimes it's bad. So I'm not a no pain, no gain guy. I'm a pain processor, and there's got to be a method to the madness. Is this a time to work through? Is this not a time to work through, and why? And we have enough science and whatever to understand where your pain's coming from, especially when you have a quality of pain. Everybody, it hurts, it's painful. Okay, yeah, I know, that's why you're here. Now, does it burn? Does it stab, throb, ache, zing? So that I can start to, as a diagnostic for a human car, be able to understand, where is this coming from, and then what are we going to do about it?
So let's take a couple of those. So if somebody comes in and says, I've got a stinging pain, a zinging pain, what are some of the first things that come to mind in general? Where do you start?
Well, that's, of course, then you're going to be thinking, well, there's probably some sort of arterial or nerve, involvement. And so those are usually qualities of pain, of course. I sat on my feet too long and I got up and they tingle. Well, that was somewhat arterial and nerve, because they run right by each other, and they have to. So sometimes, then we're saying, okay, it's one of the two, and then we can figure out, like, is this an arterial issue or is this a nerve issue based on, special testing and diagnostic.
What if I've got an ache?
Well, and ache can sometimes be nerve as well, but also it can be muscle. There's lots of research. Mike Kearns was one of my professors, who still is a professor at CU, and so one of our slides we had on there, a joint capsule is usually going to feel like this. A bones break would feel like this. And so we've got enough research to understand that different mechanisms in the body give a different quality of pain. Because unless you have intrathalamic pain syndrome, you can focus on your pain enough to be able to figure it out. And so when people always come to me and it's like, well, I hurt. And I'm like, that's fine. Don't give me all your negativity. I'm here to help you with what's wrong with you. So, where do you hurt and what kind of hurt is it?
So guys, listen closely here. So you're saying focus on the pain. So much of what we do is trying to ignore the pain, right? How much of what we hear as athletes consistently, rise and grind, relentless, these terms and these phrases that just more often than not make me think I should just ignore what my body's telling me. You're saying, no, pause, get deep into the pain.
Well, I think when you're going through the process and the healing, but when you're out there playing, you've got to be the relentless person who's not thinking about, hey, if I get hurt, I don't care. Right. You've got to be there when you're performing, but when you're going through the process of healing, then yeah, you've got to be able to focus and say, hey, what kind of pain in this, and then learn about it, because you go to somebody who's trying to teach you about, like, well, this is where this comes from. Even if somebody, whether they want to know or not, when they come into the clinic, I'm going to show you exactly, here's the tissues and this is what's wrong with you, because even if you think it doesn't matter, the fact that their eye can see what's inside them, then that's the same idea that we were talking about earlier about trying to bring your, healing properties to the area, because you can look at what's wrong. I think a big part of what helped me was that I got to go through a doctorate after I got hurt, so I could understand, oh, that's why I went through this. Oh, that's why that happened. And then now, because I can see it and I know about it, it also helps me heal from it.
So how do we there's a juxtaposition that occurs, right? So when I'm competing, I have to be, when I'm on the field, when I'm in a fight, if I'm training, I have to truly be at my edge, right? And I have to be so present in that moment that I'm not concerned about what's going to happen to my body. That I try, and we can find different ways to talk about it. We can say that place comes from a trust that I have with my body. That place could be a just energetic field that I step into that allows me to truly just be present. But either way, I have to be able to really not say, oh, if I do this, I could get hurt, right? I mean, like that can't enter my brain. Yet, when I'm training, I have to be, when I'm practicing, when I'm recovering, when I'm doing the things that go around that performance, I have to be so in touch with my body that I can feel the feedback that it's giving me so that I understand when to press, when to pull back, when to go forward, when to go backwards. How do we cultivate both? Because they seem like competing ideas at times.
Well, I mean, but they are, and I think that's the whole thing about, even like your pain signal. I always tell everybody, you got to understand that, we're always looking to get that pain signal to go away, but not understanding, what's it telling us first? Because a lot of times, when people de-innervate and when they re-innervate, it feels the same. So inhibition and excitation is how I tell people they have to look at pain. So am I inhibiting this or am I exciting this? And so then when we play with that, it's the same sort of dualism because it's going to be there. So I think, the whole thing is when to make the bridges and the boundaries between the concepts as, early in rehab, there's much more fear avoidance behavior, much more caution and stuff. And then when do we start, letting people go through there? And I don't know if there's any exact right answers all the time. Sometimes somebody can play through something and they end up being okay. And other times people will worry about it and then they completely tear that hamstring instead of being able to, kind of play through it and then they kind of get over it.
Bridges and boundaries. I love that. Like, what does that mean to you?
Well, again, when are we applying these concepts? And, at first, are we 100% in the, let's be super cautious, or are we, what kind of percentages are we in there based on who it is, the injury, the pathology, that kind of thing. And then, of course, when you're back into sport, that you're 100% not worried about anything.
So I'd be remiss, I think, if I didn't ask you, talk about the role martial arts has played in your connection to your body and just the ability you have to get your body to respond to the way you're trying to communicate with it.
Well, I think that's where, when we've talked about martial arts a lot in the past, people just think of it as fighting. And again, it's just all angles and energy transfer, and then call it what you want. Whether it be, Shaolin to Aikido to this to that, it's angles and energy transfer. And so in doing that, you're trying to, understand both of those things, then you're have to do a lot of searching as to, why can't I do this? And so many times it wasn't because I wasn't capable physically, it's because my body wasn't capable of understanding. So then, my teacher would be like, okay, how come you can bench 400 pounds and you can't do a handstand? And it's like, well, I can put my power through certain places, but my proprioception and angle changes and all this other kind of stuff, I couldn't understand that because I was taught to train power in these few angles. I can squat 500 pounds and deadlift 500 pounds, but I can't one leg squat. I couldn't pistol squat. And so that was based on too, how I was feeling my body, and so when you train a certain way, then you're going to also then feel a certain way when you're in your motion. And so again, if we have motor and sensory cortex, those things have to be able to be integrated enough that there's not a change in your current where you fall and you lose your balance, where your cerebellum then has to kick in and say, oh, I don't understand the timing, force production, and coordination of this. So then now I've got to overcorrect, and then, you fall. Or so to me, the martial arts was really understanding that what I thought was training wasn't necessarily training, even though I was really good at it because I hadn't been exposed to enough. Or, when I had first gotten into Kung Fu when I was 11 and not, understanding it the way that I was when I was doing it at 19 and 20. And then, so I think sometimes we get put into these things because our parents want us to go there and stuff. And, then we're not connecting with it as when we're looking for it. So I think that will and intent to like really want it helps people really try to get onto, I need to feel my body, much different than think about my body all the time.
So I reflect as an athlete, and there are so many things that I still do. When I work with my body, I try to recognize when is my body not doing something because it can't, and when is it not doing something because I just don't know how to ask the right question, right? Or to create the right connection, which is what you just said. So for you, was that imagery and creating those images in your essentially your mind's eye, right? Being able to say, okay, I'm gonna feel my shadow. Were those some of the ways that you began to build that bridge so that you could communicate to your body in a way that it could respond and understand with what you were actually asking?
Well, I think before too, I had a lot of orthopedic injuries, 2 broken kneecaps, tore my quad tendon, these sorts of things. But when I had a neurologic injury, that's when it made it different, where you were saying, asking the right questions. One of the things that they teach you in neuromanagement is it's not your motor problem. It's not because I couldn't have enough power. It's a sensory issue. I can't get my electricity to the area. And so it's not that I wasn't strong enough to do this handstand. It's because I couldn't invert against that shadow and feel how to put my power through the suit.
What comes to mind literally for me right there is you literally are doing a handstand and you're imagining somebody on the other side of you, a carbon copy of you, doing that handstand with you. That kind of image immediately lights my body up, right? Like I can feel, as you say that, I literally can feel my body saying, oh, I get it, right? There's somebody sitting back to back with me right now.
Exactly, right. If we're doing that instead of, like we're so busy in the conversation and then our eyes and our cranial nerves are pulling us into that as opposed to, no, wait, where's my body in space, and feel my feet.
Yeah. So let's map that to football as an example, right?
Well, that word map, then all this to me is mental mapping because it's about your homunculus, and people can look that up, and it's the way that we have this little person that's on our brain. That's why depending on where the stroke is and where the blood goes, then that's how the limbs are affected. And so mental mapping is really what this is, and it's neurolinguistics, of how we, you tell somebody abs and stomach and everybody's like, oh yeah, that's fine. You tell them ovaries and obliques and they look at you like you're weird because they're not used to hearing that within society. It's not ovaries, no, that's reproduction and all. No, it's just a place, and then what you want to do with it as a person is your thing, and then you start asking those questions like you're talking about.
So really, there is a whole layer. It sounds like, and what I'm perceiving, part of this is cheating a little bit. I have the answers to some of these questions before the test because we know each other. But what I'm perceiving a little bit of is there is a plane of communication with our bodies and that's not meant to be esoteric. That's just meant to say we don't use words to talk to our body very frequently, right? We use thought. And
Correct.
Because of that, there is a whole plane of just communication that we typically don't even access when we're trying to perform, train, practice, do anything.
Well, right, but that's why you see so many, whether it's your yoga instructor, whether it's your physical therapist or whoever it is, their coaching cues are very, very limited. Pull your shoulders back and down, suck your belly button in, tip your pelvis back, It's pretty basic, and it's very, one phrase fits all, as opposed to keep trying to come up with different words and phrases to help people access. How come we can say that word and they hear it, and then this door opens, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, look, you just did it now, with whatever it may be.
Because we're athletes, right? I mean, and as athletes, we're kinetic. We are all kinetic beings, but athletes, what makes us maybe unique is the fact that we have cultivated that love of the kinetic energy that we can create with our bodies. Yet so often we end up trying to communicate with our bodies in a non-kinetic way.
Right, and so that's the thing is that, kinetics you can meditate on, and passive meditation doesn't work for me. Some people it does, but you can close your eyes, and for those people, they can be kinetic inside their body without moving, by just using imagery, right? And so then when you bring that part of, if you want to call that your subconsciousness, to go back to your question earlier, then to consciousness, that's where a lot of people talk about kind of that mind body is really then more, to me, it's like, well, your spinal cord is one thing and your brain's a different thing. You know, my teacher would say, like, brain's stupid, because it's really, it can't process all the vibration, temperature, that's going on all at once. It would basically blow it up like a computer hard drive, because it's too much. So the brain's actually very slow. So then in athletics, you got to get your brain out of there. So the spinal cord's just doing it from central program generators. So then, we've got, the body going up and telling our processor, this is what to do. That's why too, we can overcoach people and then they freeze, because then their brain and their programmer and their processor are fighting over the position, and instead of them working in a loop, like you were saying earlier, to the most efficient output.
It's absolutely incredible. Wow. So before I ask my final question, John, where can these guys go to find you online?
I think my website's Integrative Physiotherapy. So I would just Google that.
That's perfect. Okay, so for our final question, what does it mean to you to be an Omni athlete?
Well, I think, when you say Omni, it's a circle, and so that circle means that circle is very complete. I think a lot of athletes are considered alphas, and when you're an Omni, then you can integrate amongst so many different personalities. You're able to, go down and up to any level on this pyramid, and so you can integrate with everybody, whether it's other alphas, because really Omnis are like almost a level, I don't want to say above an alpha, but it's almost like if an alpha could transcend to that Omni, then they figure out like, hey, LeBron knowing how to make everybody else better is him transcending to an Omni, and in the same way, then when you look at like Phil Jackson and Michael, one of their big semiotic things was he was a father figure to Jordan that way, especially when his dad died, because he was killed. And so them having those kind of relationships is what made him, go to that Omni level of being complete in his mind and then his sport.
Love that. That is incredible. John, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Been absolutely energizing and incredible. Guys, go online, Integrative Physiotherapy here in Fort Collins. This is not just because we are based in Fort Collins. You need to come to Colorado to experience John Kummrow in person. And the reason I say that is not just because of what he's capable of doing with your body, but what he can empower you to do with your body. And hopefully what you guys experienced in this interview is the truth that we just have planes of communication with our body that we rarely ever get to. And whether it's through energy, whether it's through healing, whether it's through rehabilitation or just training, there are things that we can do, that we can access this just latent potential that we all have as athletes, that somebody like John can really not just show you how to do, but empower you to learn and grow and discover on your own. Because ultimately, if we can't find a way to do it on our own in the moments that we need it, it doesn't help us. And that's something that you will experience immediately when you get into his world. So I cannot recommend it enough. And until next time, thanks guys. What is up, Omni Athletes? Thank you guys for watching another episode of Omni Athletes. If this content is adding value to your lives, guys, please like and share and subscribe in every way you can. Share our content. That helps us grow this community, which is really ultimately what we are after right now. So please like, comment, share, tell your friends about what we're doing. If it's adding value, please share it. And if it's not, tell us so we can really improve this content and make sure it's something that you guys want and want to see. Coming up, guys, in July, I'm super excited to announce we have the 2018 Sports Energy and Consciousness Festival. It's going to be in San Rafael, California. This is an absolutely incredible event for a lot of reasons. The main one being you get to actually engage with so many of the people that we've had on the show, so many of the leaders in sports, energy, and consciousness. The speakers are absolutely incredible, and the community is even more incredible. So I cannot encourage you guys enough. Get to this festival. It is going to be an experience that transforms your vision of athletics, your ability to achieve peak performance, to find flow, to awaken an expanded level of consciousness in your performance that you just cannot find anywhere else. It's truly the tip of the iceberg, and you guys want to be part of it. July 13th through 15th in San Rafael, California. Go to sportsenergyfestival.com to get your tickets today before they run out. It's going to go quick, guys. Get there. sportsenergyfestival.com, July 13th through 15th. We'll see you there.